Hey, what's up, y'all? It's Mandingo Superdome, New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm doing another behind the beat making video. Beat's already made, it's called Deeper. I'm going to go ahead and show you how I put that track together. First thing I did was I took the sample here by Bobby Wilson, Deeper and Deeper, and let me play that for you.
Hey, babe. I don't think you realize what you're doing to me. I find myself going through changes, doing things like I never thought I'd do before. And it's a groove, baby.
So I took that sample right there and I went ahead and recorded it into Cubase, went ahead and chopped it up a little bit, threw it on Aggrieve Agent 1, and here's pretty much the parts that I used. That's that opening lick, and here's the response. And then the other one I used was that orchestral hit that was in there. Next thing I did was I ran that sample through Melodyne to help me figure out what the notes are. Through much trial and error and editing, I was able to figure it out, and here it is on the piano. And the only part of the sample that actually wound up using was that orchestral hit. Here they are. And next thing I did was found me a bass guitar. And I also have a sub bass. And what you might notice, depending on your speaker setup, is what I did on that bass line was I had the piano playing the normal part. The bass line is just playing about the first 2 or 3 notes of the lick, and actually where the bass guitar drops out, that's where the sub bass comes in. The sub bass actually carries the entirety, mostly of the, I think it's 2 bars. You know, each segment's kind of about 2 bars. The, you know, I guess the call and then the response. And the piano kind of, I guess you could say, fades out and the sub bass continues on. And that's how I put that part together. Next up is the drums. It's just a very simple, basic kick, snare, and hi-hats. Here's the kick. Mix in the hats. And finally the snare. And go ahead and just throw the piano in here. Now here, when it comes to the hook, what I did is I just came up with a simple line on a synth. Nothing over complicated with that, and I went with the second synthesizer, only this one's a little bit phased. Adds a little more meat in there, and finally I also threw in a saxophone. And the final element that I used on the hook was some strings. And finally, moving over here to the verse part, I came up with just a slightly different line on the synths. And then I went ahead and added in a wah-wah guitar. Just add a little spice and flavor to it. And finally, here's everything on the MIDI side of it thrown together. Alright, now I'm just going to show you a few of the things that I did here on the audio side. I got the kick soloed out. I'm going to get those looping up. And what I have here is one of my very favorite plugins called Span from Box & Go. And pretty much what it's doing is it's showing me the frequency of that kick. And what I'm doing is I just went ahead and froze it here. And the major problem you can see is that pretty much, I guess you could say, the meat of that drum is here from about 30 hertz, and looks like it's coming to, you know, probably about 120-ish, and unfortunately that is in the same area that the bass line resides in. I'll show you what I mean right here. Got the bass soloed out, got it looping, and we're going to look at that through the analyzer. And what you can see is right over here, that's where that sub bass is holding that note. The majority of the guitar and stuff is a little more here in the mid-range, a little in the bass, but the sub is where the problems come in. Let me go ahead and mix the piano in just to see that as well. And there's a good free shot here of where that sub bass is coming in. You got another secondary fundamental there, and then you've got lingering piano tones that are in here. But you know, those two big peaks there are the major problem with that with the kick drum. So what I did to solve that was simply my favorite plugin, which is Space Boy. And pretty much just got one setup on the kick, one setup on the bass, and what it does is it will pretty much act like a sidechain compressor, and it'll allow a hole to be punched through the bass line for that kick to come through. And that's normally how I solve those problems when I run into them. And here's some of the processing I did on the drum track. Let's get the kick looping up. The only thing I actually did is I ran it through a PSP vintage warmer, just to be different. And then we mix in the snares here. Most of the only thing I really did was just added some reverb to give it, put it its own little space. Ran that through a vintage warmer as well. And then over here on the hats, one of my favorite plugins I like to use is the mastering exciter from Isotope. It just does a pretty good job, I guess you could say, spreading the sound across the spectrum, kind of filling it up a little bit, and obviously the reverb puts it in its own little space. Then you can see here on the other tracks, pretty much these aqua colored ones are actually all my group tracks, and I do my standard thing of doubling up each track and then assigning it a specific place on the faders. Normally it'll be like a right 50 and a left 50, you know, a right 35, 45 to just spread that sound across the spectrum. Then it's all just routed here into the group channels. The majority of the stuff here either got the Isotope alloy or an Isotope mastering exciter, and a lot of the stuff that on this track I decided to run it through the vintage warmer just to give it a little bit different sound. Hadn't used that plugin in a while. Majority of the tracks usually get capped off here with an L1 compressor, ultra maximizer. Usually I just do that simply to limit the track so it doesn't wind up clipping. Some of the tracks I'll go ahead and I'll crank the compression on just to get it to a higher level. Usually that winds up being snares is usually what I usually have to throw some compression on just to get it to kind of stand out in the mix a little bit. And then let's see, the final thing I did was my standard running it through a C6 side chain compressor just on the final mix, usually giving it a little bit of bass boost in the bottom, help it hit and knock a little bit better. I really like the sound of it. Normally what I do is, you can see here, I turn it down about 6 decibels, bring the level down so I'm not clipping anything, and then finally I give the same treatment of the L1 Ultra Maximizer, and then I'll simply crank the, like if I lower the I lowered it 6 decibels on the sidechain compressor, and then I bring it back up with the Ultra Maximizer 6 decibels to put it kind of back where it was, and it does a really good job on that. So that's pretty much just about all for the explanation there is today. Obviously you can see some of the arrangement I did here on the screen, how it's actually sequenced. I'm going to go ahead and let this thing play out. Until next time, Mandingo Superdome. You can reach me at mandingosuperdome@gmail.com. If you have any questions, concerns, if you like the tracks and want to get a hold of them,